comes the important aspect of what tools shall we use for coding, right? See, at the end of the day, you write code in C. Let's assume you write some code in C programming language, right? The C programming code, the code in C programming language is in English to start with, but it's not like our spoken English, right? It's a different type of English with a different type of syntax and semantics. Don't worry about all of that, right? So you write a C code. Let's assume all the C code you store it in .c file, right? So just the way you store your images in .jpg, right? This is the extension, right? This is the extension that we use. This is the extension that we use for images, right? Similarly, the extension that we use for C programs is .c, right? Similarly, for movies, you might have .mp4 as an extension, right? So all the C files will have an extension of .c. So let's assume I create a file called main.c. Let's assume I create it. Okay, this is a file. This is a file on your disk. You store this file, right? Because this is where you've written the actual C code. Now, the C code cannot be understood by the processor directly. Okay, so what happens is there is a tool in between. There is a tool in between called a compiler, right? There is an intermediate tool called a compiler. A compiler is also a program. What it does is it takes the main.c, the C program that you've written, it takes it as input and it outputs another file, okay, which is called the executable file. Okay, again, I'm simplifying a few things here. If you're a computer science student, there is a whole subject called compiler design, where you learn how the compiler works internally, right? So I'm not going into the details of how a compiler works because that's a semester-long subject in itself, right? So otherwise, if you give a C program file, wherein you've written your program, your actual code you have written here, right, in a .c file, your compiler takes this as input and generates an executable file. Now this executable file, the very name itself says that this can be executed onto the processor. So the way we do, actually doesn't go to the processor directly. Now this executable file will be loaded into your RAM or main memory, right, which will again be accessed by the processor now. Remember, this will be accessed by the processor through the RAM and the processor executes the instructions that you have given, right? And again, if there is input output, remember, if there is input output, obviously you will have your display and your input if you have any input from keyboard, etc. Right? So all of that is here. So in a nutshell, you store your file on disk. You store your C file on disk. Compiler is a special program. Compiler is a special program that takes your code, the file that contains your code as input. It takes this as input and it generates an output which is called the executable file. Now this executable file is loaded into the RAM and the processor executes this file and generates the output based on the input you give it. Now what compiler shall we use? There are many compilers for C. Okay, because C is a fairly old programming language. There are many compilers for C. The most popular compiler is called GCC. The full form of it is GNU C compiler, right? This is one of the most popular compilers for C itself. Okay, so by the way, GCC comes inbuilt if you are using a Linux box or a Linux computer, or if you are using a Mac, right? GCC comes inbuilt in Linux and Mac. You don't have to worry about it because a lot of the kernel code, a lot of the operating system code for Linux and Mac is actually written in C itself. So GCC comes inbuilt. So GCC comes inbuilt in Mac and Linux. But if you are using a Windows box, either Windows 7, 8, 10, whatever version, right? GCC does not come inbuilt. You will have to install additional software. To get a C compiler, to which you will give the C program as input, which will generate an executable file. So what we will use as part of this course, we thought it is best to use an online compiler. The biggest advantage, the reason we are going for this is because everything that we are learning in the course is easier to be compiled and executed using the online compiler. Right? It's just way easier for you without having to worry about installing Windows, worrying about Linux. Of course, these are important skills. I'm not denying that it's not important skill, but as far as this course is concerned, your learning is going to be easier and faster and less cumbersome if you're using the online compiler. I'll show you a couple of online compilers. You can pick whatever is the one that you're interested in. Also, having an online compiler, the biggest advantage is I can easily share code snippets with you. I can easily share code which you can execute in the browser itself. So imagine the way it works is this. I'll share some code with you. I'll share some code snippets as part of this course. And when I give an online compiler link with the code, whether you can execute it whichever box you are in. You could be, for all you know, you could be on an Android smartphone. You could just go click on this link. Whenever I share code, click on this link, change the code slightly to see how it's working and execute it within the browser itself. You can execute the whole thing within the browser itself without any hiccups. You could be on your smartphone, you could be on your tablet, you could be anywhere. The biggest advantage of an online compiler is it is easier for us to share code. It's also easy for you to modify the code slightly and execute it, whether you're using it on Android, Windows, Linux, Mac, an iPad, whatever it is, right? Because all of this is browser based. So there are a couple of very interesting ones that I wanted to show you. These are two of my favorite. The first one is called onlinegdb.com. Okay. So I'll again provide these links for you. I'll provide these links below in the description section of this video. So it's called onlinegdb.com. Okay. As soon as you go here, look at this. As soon as you go here, what you get here is you can choose the programming language you want to code in. There are a ton of programming languages at your disposal. So we'll start with C. And you can write your code here. Again, I'll show you some of these samples as we progress. You can write your code here. You can run the code here. All of that stuff. So this is a very, very simple, very, very beautiful, well-written online compiler for C, C++. Okay. Similarly, there is another very popular tool called IDE1. Okay. So this is another tool called IDE1.com. Right. This also gives you very nice tools in multiple languages. For example, this is in Java right now. I can change it to C. Now I have some C code. I can simply run the C code with single click. I can write my C code here and run it and see the output right here. Right. So these are two very popular. So IDE1, and I'll provide these links. I'll provide both of these links in the description section below. These are two of the popular online compilers where you can write C code and execute it and see the output. There are many such. By the way, you do not stick to just these two tools. You could use any tool of your choice. But we will be sharing code snippets in one of these two tools for you. Okay. So that you can see what the output is. You can change the output. See, all of this is running in your browser. Okay. So you could be actually running this code on any browser of your choice. Right. So that's important for us. Okay. So the two tools that we talked about are onlinegdb.com and IDE1. Okay, again, you need not stick to these tools. You can use any tool of your choice, but we are only sticking to these tools so that it's easier for us. It's also easier for you and faster for you to execute code. It's easier for us to share code and you can execute it just in your browser. If you are using a Linux or Mac, again, or even if you are using Windows, it's very, very easy to have GCC or something or some other C compiler. Of course, we will be sticking to GCC C compiler because this is the most popular. There are many C compilers, by the way. GCC is the most popular. This is the most popular C compiler, and hence we'll be sticking to GCC for the rest of this course, or we'll be sticking mostly to GCC for the rest of this course. Okay. So the most important tool that we need is the compiler, and we will be using online tools just to make it easy both for students and for us to share code with you.